I have chosen.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, congratulations, Jacques. Now, you may well be wondering what a physicist has to say about things like art. Well, Jacques' talk is entitled Volume, Light and Time, and it will be all to do with things central to our practice, I am sure. And I'm sure you're all as keen to hear what he has to say as I am. And at the end, we will open the floor for discussion. Don't get the cup of tea. Without further ado, Jacques.
Hello. Thanks for being here to hear me talk. In the end, I decided to go without the microphone. Just nice, but if I'm talking softly, just speak up, and I'll do that. But yes, I decided to devote the first part of my talk to explaining what it was that I thought I could, give to an artist, seeing as I don't have formal art education. I think the extent of my art education is reading about art history in my spare time and sitting in on lectures at uni that I wasn't supposed to be in. But I think there is something that artists can gain from looking at fields that seem initially completely unrelated. And the connecting thing is fairly abstract. It's ideas. Basically, the wise man once said, if you want to have a good idea, you should have a lot of ideas. And some of those are bound to be good. And you can get your ideas from all kinds of sources. And frequently it's better to step outside the pool in which you usually sample your ideas and get some from off-the-wall places. So the basic idea of this talk is just to pick out certain ideas from physics which are connected in some vague way to what artists think about. And so I've picked volume, light and time because those are topics which physicists and artists. And I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of crazy ideas at you, which I've gotten from the perspective of a physicist. And I hope that, while many of those might seem frivolous or silly, one or two might capture your interest and you might take that away and do something awesome with it. So, having got that out of the way, I'd like to start with this quote from David Lynch, which unfortunately has been cut off.
Sure.
Can we?
Hang on, just maybe.
Why? Thank you. Yeah, okay. I'll read it to you. I learned that just beneath the surface there's another world, and still different worlds as you dig deeper. I knew it as a kid, but I couldn't find the proof. It was just a feeling. There's goodness in blue skies and flowers, but another force, a wild pain and decay, also accompanies everything. Like with scientists, they start on the surface of the sea, and then they start delving. They get down to the subatomic particles, and their world is now very abstract. They're like abstract painters in a way. It'd be hard to talk to them because they're way down in there. And so David Lynch is one of my heroes. He's a director of surrealist films. And I like this quote because that sort of captures what I think is one parallel. You could actually interchange scientists with artists in this quote, I think. He could be talking about how artists in contemplating the world get down into things and in an intellectual way that resembles the approach that scientists take. So starting with that, can I get back to the slideshow? Okay, we'll just do this. I'd like to begin with one idea which comes from science and which is central to both art and science, which is the act of observation. So consider this chair. This is a brown chair, probably the most platonic and idealized object ever. The statement, "this chair is brown." Many of you will probably agree that that statement has no meaning standing on its own. The chair is brown according to who? According to my uncle who is colorblind? If I said the chair is black when the light is off, or the chair is brown when illuminated with an orange light, these could all mean different things. So the observer is really central to statements like this.
Sure. Brown.
Would have been terribly ironic if it looked a different colour. And scientists, of course, are well aware of this. When a scientist says the chair is brown, what they actually mean is the chair is brown when illuminated with white light at 100 watts in a laboratory as verified by people with perfectly functioning vision, etc. We usually cut off all that extra stuff and it's just assumed when the scientist says the chair is brown. But if you go and look at their paper on the topic, you'll find all the rest of it. So we understand that the observer is important, and particularly in relativity, for example, it turns out that your measurements of distances and times will depend on how fast you're moving. So you can't simply state, the chair is 1 meter wide without also stating how fast you're moving relative to the chair. And in art, this is true as well. The observer is important, and really the effect of an artwork is not so much intrinsic to the artwork as it is a feature of the relationship between the artwork and the person observing it. So I learned recently that it's possible to perceive the colour blue in a painting that actually contains no blue paint, which really blew my mind. But that illustrates this point nicely. And I think the idea I'd like to present is we can take this a little bit further. Sometimes the relationship between the observer and the object can have an unexpected significance. So maybe you know about this old painting by Michelangelo, The Creation of Adam. There's God flying up in some big cloud with his angels, creating Adam on his fingertip, as one does. And this was taken at face value for a long time until it was seen by a man who was a practicing doctor. And he said, hey, that's funny. That cloud around God looks exactly like the cross-section of the human brain. And indeed, if you superimpose the parts of the brain on there are certain features which seem almost like they can't be accidental, like the pituitary gland. Where's my pointing stick? Etc., etc. And the figure 13 there makes it look even more convincing. Now, of course, this could just be a coincidence. I mean, the brain really is just sort of a round, blobbish-looking thing. And maybe this wasn't intentional on Michelangelo's part at all. But the point I'm trying to make is that this connection was made by somebody because of their background knowledge, somebody who knew what the cross-section of the brain looked like. That then entered into their perception of the painting and added it to it this whole new dimension. So what I would suggest is that, as an artist creating an artwork, if you're aware of some features of the background of the observers of the art, like their cultural background or their education, you might be able to use that to your advantage in creating certain effects in how they perceive your art. And the next thing I'd like to talk about, and I'll use an analogy with cavemen, because I find it amusing. I'd like to talk about an additional feature of the effect of the observer, which comes from quantum mechanics. Don't worry, I won't present any equations to you. But basically the effect is that when you observe something, you change it. And this is not what you would normally expect, but it turns out to be true of tiny subatomic particles such as electrons, as I'll explain. So imagine Aggie the caveman, or cavewoman in this case, I should say. She's sitting at the bottom of the cliff, and there are boulders continually rolling down this mountain, one after the other. And they reach this wall with two doors in it, and they may go through one door or through the other door. Aggie can't see which door it goes through. And then the boulders come and smash into this cliff and leave a mark, and Aggie sits there looking at the marks and taking notes.
Not safe for her to see.
But the important thing is, for each boulder, she has no idea which door it went through. But of course, it's possible that her friend Bob is standing on the cliff. He may or may not be there, but if he is there, he'll be able to see which door the boulder went through. And if I may make a very trivial observation, which I'm sure you'll agree with, the marks on the cliff, in the case where Bob is not standing there, will look something like this. So this cluster of indentations are from the boulders that went through the door on the left, and these represent the door on the right. And of course, if Bob were to be standing there the whole time watching it before they went through, that would not affect the pattern at all. But what's really crazy is this is no longer true for electrons. Electrons they come from the outside of the atom, and for the most part, they behave sort of like boulders. So for example, if we were to do this experiment with electrons, in the case where Bob is standing there watching which gate the electron goes through, this is what the pattern would look like. Same thing. You get the same thing. So electrons do behave like boulders in this case. But here's the crazy part. If we take Bob away, this is what the pattern looks like. This is an actual data from an experiment where they did this with electrons. And instead of getting just two areas where the points are clustered, you get a whole series due to what we call interference fringes. The main message of all of this is that we now know that when you look at something, you change how it behaves. It matters whether or not there's some guy looking which door the electrons went through. So how could we maybe relate this idea from physics to art? Well, it may surprise you that there's one really big and clear example where this happens a lot. The Great Pyramids. So if we consider these as works of art, you may know that due to continuous tourism to the pyramids, the humidity from people's flesh is causing the walls inside the pyramids to erode. And they're actually having to close off parts of the pyramids to try and preserve them. And this erosion is purely due to the fact that people keep showing up to look at them. But an example maybe closer to home is in life drawing. And this is my best rendition of the naked male form. I hope I get some likes for that.
That arrow that was really cool. Is that just a coincidence?
Arrow.
Yeah, like a point on
That's my nose.
What's the probability of that happening?
Yeah.
That's pretty scary.
But ignoring that. So I propose the following thought experiment. Normally, I mean, in a life drawing setting, the artist is sitting around watching the model, and each is aware that the other one is there. But of course, in most cases, the model can see the artist and the artist can see the model. What if we put a one-way mirror in between them, so that the artist can still see the model, but the model can no longer see the artist? So now we're taking out the observer, if you like. And my question is, would that change what the drawings look like of the artist? Any suggestions? Well, one thing I thought of is that usually the model will not look at any of the artists or make eye contact with them. They'll just focus on a spot in the distance. But if they don't know where the artists are sitting, it might just happen that they're making direct eye contact with one of them. So you could get a pretty nice, intense picture with the model staring straight at the artist, which you wouldn't get if that divisor wasn't there. And I suspect there are probably far more interesting ways in which you could investigate how the observer, or the artist in this case, affects the subject of the art. But I'll leave that to you to think of. I'd like to talk now about light. So this here is an atom. This is the middle of the atom, the nucleus, and the electron flying around. It's not too bad.
How's that?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Have I missed any of the forces?
No, we got it. So there are four forces in nature that we know about. They're called the strong force and the weak force, and they live inside the middle of atoms. And then you have the electromagnetic and gravitational force, and they act in between atoms. And the really fun thing is that all of our senses, including taste and smell and touch, are based on the electromagnetic force. We do not have sensors for the other forces. And you might think, well, sure, I can sense gravity because I can feel it pulling me down right now. But actually what you're feeling, that force, the way we think about it in physics, is it's the Earth stopping you. If you were simply falling towards the Earth in free fall, say in an elevator, you would have no idea whether there was just empty space around you or whether there was actually a planet that you were falling towards. Either way, you'd be in zero gravity. If we could sense gravity, then we would know the difference. But the force that stops you going through the ground or through a chair is the electromagnetic force between the atoms. And similarly, you can ask me later how all of these reduce to the electromagnetic force, but you can take my word for it so that this doesn't go forever. But that's cool because the waves in the electromagnetic field are what we know as light. And light, of course, is very important to art. So here's a challenge that I'd like to pose to you based on the fact that the observation that we can't sense gravity. Is there nevertheless some way that we can see the mass of objects? So could you, by some clever trickery, convey the mass and weight of an object in a painting, say, well, this was my attempt, and I hope you can see which one is meant to look heavier. but I'll leave you with that thought. The next is that light, the fact that all of our senses come through light gives light a lot of power, but light also has its own limitations. For example, we know it travels at a finite speed. It doesn't go infinitely fast. So there's always some delay between when something happens, like a tree falling in the forest, and when we actually see it happen. And then a slightly longer time after that, we'll actually hear the sound, which goes slower than light. So it's interesting to think that we might be this monk here who sees a tree, even though at that moment the tree has fallen down. So the question is, what is the real state of the tree with respect to that monk? The observer is always important. And the second idea that's somewhat related to the features of light is known as the holographic principle. Now I should say that we don't know whether nature obeys the holographic principle or not. It's a modern idea which we think might be true, but it hasn't been proven yet. But the idea is this. Consider yourself looking at a chair from a safe distance. And consider the fact that for you to know anything about this chair, you must know it through light. And specifically through light that bounces off the chair and goes to your eye. Now, if you surround this chair by an imaginary volume with some surface, every beam of light that reaches you must go through the surface at some point. And the holographic principle says that actually, if you removed everything within that volume, and you just put the right kind of light-emitting points on the surface, you would not be able to tell the difference from outside. So basically, anything that you experience could be a simulation of itself on the surface of the volume around it. That's the idea of the holographic principle. And there again, you have things which are kind of hidden from you. The reality of the object is hidden in this case because you're limited to experiencing things through light. And this is a painting called The Human Condition by Magritte, which I really like. I have no idea why it's called The Human Condition. If anyone could explain that to me, that would be great. But I like it because it does illustrate the holographic principle. Here he has a two-dimensional flat surface, but that's standing in for the reality that exists beyond the window. And from our point of view, we really can't tell the difference between the two. And the challenge I propose related to this is it possible to indicate the presence of objects in a still life, for example, that are hidden behind other objects? So is there a difference between a vase with nothing behind it and a vase that has significant objects sitting behind it? And can you convey that difference through clever tricks in art? And here, of course, I've cheated by having like the shadows sticking out, but maybe there's an even smarter way to do it. I don't know. And yeah, so I think this,
Transparent or
well,
transparent.
that might be a way to do it. Have it or reflections of other surfaces. Yeah. And finally, I'll talk about time. This is to finish up. It's quite difficult to relate time to art, even though obviously there are many different connections. I'm going to avoid talking about, I guess, some of the approaches that have been taken before, because many artists have used time in their art in different ways, particularly in art that has physical motion, for example, or art that decays with time. But I'd like to think even more abstractly. So first of all, in physics, this is how we think about time. We think about it as a dimension, just like space. So imagine a human being. Human being extends in space roughly 1 meter on each side. You could squish yourself into a 1 meter box on all sides. So we say the human being is about 1 meter big in space. But how big are we in time? Well, according to physics, if you imagine this human being getting older with time, we can lay that out on a timeline. And so you can see here the person starts out and they get older and older and they turn into a skeleton. And we'd say that the size of a human in time is equal to their lifetime, 80 years. And amazingly, in physics, because time and space are connected through light, incidentally, we can convert measures of time into measures of distance using the speed of light. In particular, if you take this and multiply by the speed of light in meters per second, you get 1 million billion kilometers as the size of a human in time. Which is really interesting, I think. It means that we are actually very long worms in space-time, like long threads. But the really interesting thing is that this is what we know from modern physics. That's the extent of it. And there is no notion of the present in this picture. We cannot explain from physics why we perceive only one of these moments at any time. And the reason is because to explain how we perceive time, you also need to go to neurology and psychology. And we have yet to get to that level of sophistication of uniting that with physics. So it's a mystery. But where some people see a mystery, I see an opportunity. Because if we can't explain how we perceive time, it's possible that that might be open to manipulation. Maybe you can manipulate how people perceive time through art, for example. Can you create artworks which take people back in their memories, or which make time seem to stand still, or which create anticipatory effects of what's going to happen next? And I guess you'll agree that these are all possible. So I suggest that it would be interesting to think about how far you can take them. So I'll end with 3 paintings that I like, which I think illustrate how paintings might affect your sense of time. The first is The Girl at Window by Dali, which, for me at least, this evokes memories because I spent a lot of my school years looking at windows at sunshine outside and wishing I was out there. And that really brings back that emotion that I had and takes me back there. And it's really interesting also because there's a lot that isn't shown in this picture. You don't see the rest of the room, and you don't see what's out there. You don't really see what the girl is looking at, or even her face. And your imagination is therefore really encouraged to fill in that information. And I think that's what also encourages you to conjure up memories. This is by Anderson, an artist who I saw at Philip Bacon Galleries a while ago. Some of you maybe were there. I don't know if this painting was there. But I really like this one because I could stare at it for forever, just looking at the individual raindrops.